Good morning, everyone. I am pleased to introduce our presenter, Nancy Rausch, a senior software manager and data scientist at SAS Institute. In her role, Nancy leads a team that develops SAS data governance and data quality products using advanced AI and machine learning methods. In addition to her role at SAS, she serves as chairperson of the Linux Foundation AI and Data Technology Advisory Council, promoting the adoption of open source technologies at the crossroads of AI and data. She also applies her expertise in energy technology at SAS and is an advisory board member for the NSF-funded nonprofit Laser Institute. Nancy holds advanced degrees in data analytics and computer engineering from Capella University and Duke University, respectively. She has authored numerous research papers and she's an active contributor to various conferences in her field. So please join me in welcoming Nancy Rausch.
Thank you, Lily. Hello, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Can you see my screen? Great. So I'm going to talk about designing effective online surveys, which was actually a very fun topic because I had to do some research for this. Most of the research I've done is contained in the PowerPoint on each slide, and I have some at the end, some links to additional places you can go to learn more about this space. Okay, so just a little bit about me. As Lily said, I had a promotion recently. I'm a director of research and development and a data scientist at SAS. And I do work with the Linux Foundation and then a number of other nonprofits, have a passion for education and training up the next generation of data scientists in a space that I love. So I have the privilege and the opportunity to work with a number of educators in this area. I do hold several advanced degrees, and I do have a number of specializations in my field, particularly around data management, data governance, and bringing AI into those spaces. I do some research in social science analytics, and then also in renewable energy. Just a little bit about SAS. We're a large statistical software company. You probably already know this. And our mission is really just to bring knowledge out of data, to extract knowledge from data, to the power to know that encapsulates what we do in a living. And this is a picture of our headquarters, which has pie right out front. We even have a pie day, and pie is available for everybody who comes on campus to have some pie. For educators, we do have free training, lots of webinars, many courses available in the field of analytics, data management, and AI. And I encourage everyone to take advantage of them. They're very good classes. You also probably have access to classes that you can pay for, or we may be providing access to in many ways for free. So take advantage of them. They are not just language specific to the SAS language, but they are there's many courses around just good best practices, data literacy, statistics. They have a great statistics 1 course, and I always go back to it periodically just to refresh how does the odds ratio work when I need to remember how to do that. And that kind of coursework is available on our website through our free e-learning platform. All right, with that, we're going to move into designing effective online surveys. And I do want to bring up the chat because I try to make this a little interactive given how long the seminar is. I don't want to lose anybody. Okay, so it's a simple agenda. We're going to go through some concepts about what online surveys are and why they're useful. Then we're going to get into the big iceberg, design. It's the big place. We're going to talk a lot about it. We can't really, there are courses on survey design that we can't really scratch the surface on here, but we'll get into some of the best practices for survey design. And then how errors can come in, sampling, errors in other ways, and bias, and end up with a Q&A at the end. So let's get into concepts. So first of all, what's a survey? It's a way to collect data. And it's a way to collect data. If you were able to be looking down, all seeing, you could sample everybody in a population and get the answer for something. How many people like ice cream? If you could ask everybody in the United States, you would know how many people really liked ice cream. But you can't do that. That's impossible. So a survey uses sampling techniques to figure out from a sample of people how many like ice cream and extrapolate the true population from that. So that's a statistical kind of explanation for what a survey is. And there's a bunch of surveys. We have always done in our country telephone surveys. Even before that, we did mail surveys. That's a very popular type of survey still, even though the number of telephones are going down, it's statistically still viable to do telephone surveys. Then, of course, if you can go door to door, face to face, that's another way to conduct a survey. You can give people a paper and pencil and have them fill the surveys out that way. And of course, you can go online. And we're only going to talk about online surveys in this talk. So why online surveys? Well, they have some real significant advantages. They can reach a very broad community. People are online all across the world. You can put out a survey and reach people that you might never be able to go door to door with or conduct a telephone survey with. So there's access to a very broad community. It has its challenges. They may not speak the same language. They may not even have the same understanding when you ask questions. But it does have the ability to reach a very wide segment of the world population. They're also very cost effective. You can put a survey up in a few minutes as an online survey. To develop some sort of mail survey, you have to write all the survey up, you have to mail it out, it costs money. This is a really cost-effective way to gather information. And then you can really specifically hone in on a target audience, especially with access to a lot of the data that people have today about themselves. You can particularly hone in even free data that people, you don't even have to mine specific unfree or hidden data about people. You can reach out to people in a specific group, or you can ask people in a domain that you're aware of that they're in. So you can target a specific audience to get information. And online gives you a greater advantage to do that than other methods. And finally, how do we collect them? Generally through emails or social media or via website. So here's some of the pros. They're fast, they're easy to collect. You don't need to administer it through an administrator other than the tools you're using to send the online survey out. You get that large audience, saves everybody a lot of time. And here's a really nice one. You can go directly to the respondent and get information, which other survey methods, if you're using any intermediary other than yourself to collect them, that's not always the case. So you actually are reaching the people that you know are responding to your survey. And that's what's a bot. Hopefully it's not a bot responding. But there are some cons. You may not be able to get to all the demographics you want. To conduct an online survey, you need some sort of computer access and you need some sort of computer literacy. Not necessarily a big problem in first world countries, but it could be a big problem in third world countries. And there are different hardware requirements. If you're going to do that survey, it's got to work on a mobile. It's got to work on a tablet because people use different kinds of hardware. It's got to work across Linux and Windows and Apple operating systems. So those are challenges to consider. And in general, survey response rates for online surveys is not huge. You do get a better response rate from in-person and mail surveys than you do from an online survey. Generally, 30% is considered good, 10 to 20 is probably more likely. And therefore, you got to query more people to get a higher sample population. People also have short attention spans. Think about the one question that pops up after you purchase something. How did you like our website? How many of us click through it and say, just don't even want to answer? So even one question sometimes won't get answered. So the survey in an online use case really has to be targeted because we're all busy and we have short attention spans. There's two kind of types of surveys and questions. So type 1 is quantitative. This is our numbers. It's a measurable and specific type of question and survey. So an example is, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, that's the number, the measure. How important is travel to you? That's an easy way to answer a question. It's an easy way to get information. But then there's qualitative, and don't discount these questions. These are the open-ended questions, and they'll lead to deeper understanding. So generally, we put qualitative questions at the end of a survey because if you put them first, people will just ignore the survey and not complete it. They don't want to have to spend a lot of time doing the survey, but they will lead to deeper understanding. So if you do want to get that deeper understanding, consider these open-ended questions. They're harder to analyze, but they can provide a more deeper insight into the responses. So when to use quantitative? When you want to basically estimate the true population from a sample. So you want to draw a general conclusion. These are the ones that are easy to implement and the results are objective and conclusive. Use qualitative when you want to measure opinions or motivations or attitudes. These are things like, why do you like to travel? Why do you think your manager's a good manager or a bad manager? Why do you enjoy going to college? These are the kinds of questions that you can get deep insights into people's motivations for when you ask these open-ended questions on a survey. You do have to mine them though and figure out the data. So this is a great example. Suppose you just had a conference and you wanted to get some feedback from the conference attendees. A quantitative answer would be, how many people attended the conference? What was your overall satisfaction, 1 to 5? What did you think of the quality of the speakers? A qualitative answer would be, what other topics would you like to see? How could we improve next year? You might only get 10% of the respondents who respond for that, but they tend to be the most passionate and they can provide the deepest insights for questions that you want to get insights from, opinions. Okay, moving on to design. So before we go in here, I just want to note that this is like an iceberg. We're going to cover the top, the snow at the top, but this is such a deep topic. So we're going to go into a series of best practices. And the right-hand side is pointing out that there's a million best practices. You really have to kind of sift through them. And I do give you some tips at the end to help with that. So there are a bunch of them, and I've sort of grouped them into these best practices. Have a clear goal. Ask the right questions. Make it easy to respond and ask and get accurate responses. Special handling needs to go to demographic questions. What survey lengths work and what don't, and then a few other tips. So let's talk about what does it mean to have a clear goal. So you should ask yourself, can I quantify what I want to know from this survey? And you want to get it down to one thing for an online survey. I want to know one thing. If you want to know a second thing, do another online survey. So get to the heart of what you want to know. Once you've got there, then you can define objectives that help you achieve your goal. And we're going to give some examples of this. After you've got your objectives, you brainstorm the questions. These are the questions you're going to ask to help you achieve your objective, which will answer the overall goal, the one thing you want to know. Now, this takes time. It's hard to hone down to exactly what you want to know. So ask yourself these questions. What do I want to know? Who should I ask this stuff about? And what do I want to do with the information? And that will help you kind of hone in on that goal. The best formula we have, and we use this in our company all the time, is think about SMART goals. So if you're trying to set a goal, think about it as in this context of the SMART goal framework. And you probably use this, or you've seen this in lots of different contexts, but it just works. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound. So let's talk about what each of those means. So specific. You want to be very precise in your goal and your objectives. That's specific. What is my one goal I want to achieve? Measurable. Rather than trying to say, how do I increase my customer retention? Think more along the lines of, can I increase customer retention by a specific number, like 5%? What I want to figure out how I can increase customer retention by 5% or 10%. That's measurable, not just increase it. And then make sure whatever you're trying to measure, you can actually achieve. So you may not be able to get from 60 to 90 happiness level, but you might be able to get from 60 to 70. So make what you're trying to define here in your goals as something that is actually achievable. You might want to find out what percentage of our population likes vanilla ice cream. And for that, you want to be able to say, okay, I can't ask the whole country that question, but maybe I can ask everyone in the Minneapolis area. Not every specific person, but I can take a representative sample to find out in that area who likes vanilla ice cream. So that's achievable. So set at something that you know you can achieve. Is it relevant? Do you really want to know if people like vanilla ice cream or not? So is what you're trying to ask, what question you're trying to ask, relevant to who likes vanilla ice cream? Or maybe you just want to know who likes specific desserts. So make sure your questions and your objectives are specific to what you're trying to achieve with your goal. And then you want to have it time bound. So if you're asking who has ever liked vanilla ice cream across the country in the last 100 years, probably not going to be able to achieve that goal. But who liked it last summer is much more relevant to the time frame of about vanilla ice cream. So consider the time domain when you're considering your goals. So we're going to talk about a couple of examples. So I have a goal. I want to understand why our customers churn. So I'm some company, and my customers churn means that they are not buying from us anymore, or they purchased and they've stopped purchasing. So why did they stop purchasing? So the objective, a good objective would be, what are the factors, identify the factors that led to the customers canceling. I've just recently been working with a large telephone company that is supposed to be providing access to Wi-Fi in a remote location. And we canceled our situation with them because they made it so difficult to get access to their Wi-Fi. That's something they may want to know, is perhaps we've been very happy with their telephone service, but we've not been very happy with their cable service. And that's something that could cause us to churn or leave. So trying to identify and hone in on what the reasons were that we might leave is a great objective. It's very specific. So using those specifics, now I have a specific goal, I have specific objectives. What kinds of questions could I ask? So here's some good questions. Why did I return a specific product A? Why did we not go with the company for a cable? That would be a very good specific question, as opposed to, how happy were you with us as a company? That would be very hard for me to answer, because in some of their products I'm happy, but in others I'm not. And so asking a more specific objective to hone in on why I was unhappy in a specific area, I can ask about the specific product that I didn't want. Or how happy were we with the support we received? Maybe I liked the Wi-Fi box, but I didn't like the fact that the tech support group couldn't help me set it up. So that would still cause me to return the product potentially. So honing in asking very specific questions about the product, all aspects of that product, the tech support, the documentation, etc., will help me hone in on why would I cancel product A. So that's just kind of an example of a goal, objectives, and then the questions that tie into that are good examples of a survey that would like to hone in to achieve that goal. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about what questions you might want to ask. So you want to spend some time thinking about those questions. Again, to achieve that goal, SMART, measurable, achievable, the SMART goal pattern. And we do this in the AI space. We'd sit down when we're trying to figure out, okay, what kind of model are we trying to build and what are we trying to predict? And we go think about, okay, what features are we going to develop or find or integrate in to help predict that model? The same kind of process applies here. What questions and data do we want to help us answer the questions we're interested in, reach our goal? You got to make sure that if you're going to ask a question, people understand it and can in fact answer it. So it's not got information they don't have, it doesn't require information that they don't have readily available to be able to answer the question. That's the right stuff for a question. People need to quickly understand it and they need to be able to answer it without having to do work to answer that question. And we're going to go into some examples of good and best practices there. So here's an example of a question. Think about it in terms of a respondent-oriented approach. And you want to make it super easy for people to respond to your questions. So here's an example. How many times did you purchase non-food items during the past month? With a fill in the blank. Now this falls down in a lot of different ways, but let's take it apart. What's a non-food item? To me, that might be, I don't know, laundry soap. To somebody else, that might be motor oil. We purchase both. How do I add those up in my mind? It's not clear enough. And then what about services? You know, do I have an item? Is that a thing? Or is that a Wi-Fi service? It's non-food item, but it's a service, but it's something I purchased. So you need to kind of get closer to the question and the details you want. Being more specific would help here. And then not making me type in a number. I probably would skip over this question if I had it on a survey, because I don't know. Is it 10, 100, 1,000? I don't know. I can't count that back up. So giving more choices to me would be a better choice. So here's a better way to reframe it. About how many times did you make a purchase during the past week? Now I know I had time frame, either in person or online. Oh, wow, I didn't even think about online purchases. Now I'm prompting a memory here. This is helping me as a respondent answer this question. And then it's telling me what to exclude. So I want to exclude groceries or restaurants. So it's now telling me specifically what type of food purchases I want, what kinds of items I don't want. And it's finally giving me like some choices to pick from it here. Easy for me to understand, and I can respond in about 7 to 10 seconds on this question, which is great because that's about the time frame all literature recommends you spend on a question in a survey. So my cognitive burden as a respondent is much lower. So a good question will ask about something of interest, but nothing else, convincing me to respond, and that it's okay to put some effort in to respond, and helps me easily respond. So that's the giving me a scale to respond and giving me very specific things to hone in on as I'm making my choice. Let's talk about the Likert scale. So this is one of the most reliable ways to measure opinions, perceptions, and behaviors with a simple multiple choice question. It generally uses a 5 or 7-point scale. There's always a neutral option, but it's really generally well received. Research has shown this one to be very generally well received. Note that this type of scale really only works when you're asking a specific topic on a specific goal. If you have multiple questions in your survey or multiple goals in your survey, it's going to get harder and harder for people to be able to rank the choices appropriately because they forget what they're answering for back in your goal. So part of the best practice of surveys design, try to achieve one goal at a time in a survey. So this is what it looks like. And it gives you a scale. This one can up to 10 with tips along both sides to tell me what 0 means and what 10 means. So this is an example. How likely would I recommend this to this company to a friend? I can answer that really easily on anything that you ask me about on any topic. I can just pick one of those things. There's lots of neutrals in there I can choose from. Definitely like this kind of question as a respondent. So here's an example of it a little bit more in depth. How satisfied or dissatisfied are you with the quality of the dinner you were served tonight? And you can use your scale. You can dig down there. Okay, dinner's a big topic. Maybe I just want to know about dinner. That's my goal. How good was the dinner? I can start at the dinner. Then I can dig into each one of these pieces. What about the quality of the appetizers? Another scale. The main course, the dessert. I'm going to come out of this survey knowing everything there is I can understand from that person who's responding about that dinner. Not just that they like the dinner, but which aspects of the dinner. I've got good details drilled into how they understand and like their dinner and what I can maybe do better. Maybe the appetizers I can improve on. So I can really gain some good in-depth about that dinner by asking these specific questions and using that scale. This is called depth. I'm going to get a quality of food depth to measure all kinds of variance about that dinner in a food topic. And this is a great example of a good survey in that I can get all kinds of depth for that specific topic. Okay, with all that in mind, some things to do more of. Remember the detail, specific and measurable. How many months ago did you leave your job? Not did you recently leave your job, yes or no, but now you can ask how many months and give them a scale and they can give you that detail. You'll now know a lot more about them just by getting that one piece of detail than if they just left their job. They could have left their job 5 jobs ago. This going into this detail will tell you how specifically and how long ago they left their job. Ask one thing at a time. In the last 12 months, did you have any questions about how to feed your child? If yes, then in the last 12 months, did your doctor talk to you about those specific questions? If yes, how well were your questions answered with a scale? So now I've honed into, I got my first question, did I have any questions? Then I drilled into, okay, now about that. Was it the doctor that I asked those questions to? Or was it the nurse that I asked those questions to? And so I'm getting down further into depth about feeding your child topic. My goal of understanding questions somebody might have had and how well they got answers to them on feeding your child. And if you ask them one at a time, you can drill down to get that depth. Use closed-end responses. If this class was available in your area, how likely would you be to participate? Or would you participate, yes or no? People will basically tell you probably in that case, no, more likely than yes. But if I give them some gradations of choice, very likely, somewhat likely, a little likely, not likely at all, I'm going to drill into more about, gee, maybe they would attend if they knew more about it. There's a little bit of interest versus no interest. If you just get a no or a yes, you won't get those kinds of gradations of understanding. And then answers should be mutually exclusive and don't be afraid to be exhaustive. So current marital status is a great example. You could say married, not married. That tells you one thing, but there's a lot of gradations in there. Married, separated, divorced, widowed, never been married, living with a partner, living with a spouse. Feel free to add all kinds of answers in there so people can find the one that belongs to them. We have lots of variations in this kind of a demographic measurement. It's okay to put all those in there. People will pick the one that they think is closest to them. If you want to know that, you got to be specific. Things to avoid. Okay, we're going to go through some questions, so get your chat ready. Don't use unfamiliar terms. Avoid a lack of a time frame. Don't ask multiple questions, and don't make assumptions that might be inaccurate. So let's go into examples about it. All right, so remember these. Don't use unfamiliar terms. Avoid lack of a time frame. Don't ask multiple questions. Don't make assumptions. Okay. Do you think the United States should not sign the Kyoto Protocol? This is a bad question. For what reason? You can put it in the chat. Yeah, you're all getting it. What's the Kyoto Protocol? I'd have to go probably Google that to understand what it is. Don't use unfamiliar or technical terms I might not know, because I probably can't respond to that one. So they need enough information to be able to actually respond. Okay, how satisfied were you with your recent purchase? What's wrong with this question? Yeah, Timothy's got it. So it's how recent was it? Yesterday? I bought a lot of stuff yesterday. Was it last week? I bought 3 things from Amazon. Which purchase? Very nebulous, no time frame. What does recent mean? So not a good question for that reason. Do you want to be rich and famous? What's wrong with this one? Don't be shy. Yeah. Yep. Don't ask multiple questions. And how can I possibly choose? I want both. How can I not get to rich and famous? Very true. All right, and the last one. When riding in the backseat of a car, do you wear a seatbelt? All of the time, most of the time, some of the time, once in a while or never. What's wrong with this one? So this one's a little tricky. I'll give it to you. What if I never ride in the backseat of a car? I may never do that. So that's making an assumption that may not be accurate for me. So that's a hard one to think about, but when you're writing questions, think about it. Am I making some sort of an assumption about my audience that they may not make for themselves? All right, let's talk about accuracy. So you get the best questions in the world, you ask all the right stuff, you got a beautiful goal, you ask your questions, and it doesn't turn out the way you expect. The London Eye on the eve of Brexit. Sometimes people mislead, which all the pundits and all the polls were saying that Brexit was going to lose, and in fact it won. And the whole world was surprised. So why do people mislead? This is a great example. my goal is I want to understand about universal health insurance. So I go out and I ask a very good question. Do you favor or oppose health insurance for all people in the United States? Not a great question, but the starts of a good question. It's not really a good question for a bunch of reasons. It's too nebulous. Most people are not opposed to having health insurance. Opposition, understanding the audience and the scope of the question would help me hone in on a better question, because opposition generally centers around who's going to pay for it, who will provide it. And this is just asking a yes or no question, and I'm not going to get very specific. It's very specific here. So let's rephrase this question. How do you feel about universal health insurance? So I got it down to very specific things. How likely would you be to vote for a universal health insurance plan that was funded by the federal government taxpayer dollars? And I gave them a scale. This is a much better question. I'm going to get enough variation. I can get demographic information to help me understand this question and who's answering it what way. And I'll now be able to hone in to very deep detail about universal health insurance and what people are thinking across many different domains and spaces and locations. So that's a better way to phrase that kind of somewhat politically charged question. And you can do a lot with that. Funded by private taxpayer dollars, funded by something else. You can go into a lot of details and get very specific knowledge about what people think about that goal. So why do people distort? And there's really, the literature says there's really 3 reasons. They may feel unsafe when answering truthfully. Not sure why, there's lots of reasons, but they just may feel unsafe. Or they may feel that if they report it correctly, they're going to be embarrassed, or they want to be more favorably considered. And so they'll just answer it untruthfully because they don't want to report something that hurts them or makes them feel like they're not being presented in a favorable way. This is true even in, and there's a couple papers that I found, even in surveys that are anonymous. Sometimes if the question is phrased in a way that would make someone look bad, it's on them. They're thinking they look bad. And so they don't even, that hurts. That sets up a cognitive dissonance, and they don't want to feel bad about themselves. And so they'll answer it in a way that makes them feel better about themselves. So something to watch out for is that that's a good reason for distortion. And then social pressures. Another thing, we all belong to our groups, our family groups, our friend groups, our work groups, our groups that we live with in our businesses or in our towns or whatever. And we belong to all these different groups and we identify with them. And if we feel like group A is going to say it this way, even if that's not true, we're going to sort of self-identify with group A and try to answer the way group A, that we think group A would respond. So these are the reasons that people might distort their answers. You can mitigate this to some extent. You can state upfront, your answers are confidential. This survey is anonymous. To some extent, it will alleviate some of the concerns here around the safety or the social pressures. And research has shown that that will drop some of the inaccurate survey responses to by some percentage, with the fact that just stating upfront that answers are anonymous. If you can phrase a word, a sentence in a way that gives people an out, like this right here, then they may be more willing to answer the question honestly. So this is a great example. I want to understand why people don't exercise. And you could say, well, why don't you exercise? Or how many hours do you exercise a week? Or something like that. And they might not report it accurately. So if you phrase it in a way that makes them feel better about themselves, they may be more accurate. Many people, here's a great example of a question, phrased to give people an out. People do not exercise as much as they want because of family responsibilities, their work, or because they don't have facilities convenient to them. How about you? Would you say you do or do not exercise as much as you like to? People got an out up there. I want to exercise more, but I just can't, and I understand it. Yeah, I would say I don't exercise as much as I want to. They're more likely to give you a truthful answer if you give them an out than if you didn't. So it's okay to put words at the top to give them an example if you're asking a question that might make them feel bad about themselves, so that they are more able to answer accurately. This is another one. This came out of a paper. How much TV do you watch in a day? And you'll find that scale B was the first answer that went out, which was less than 2.5 hours. I watch TV less than 2.5 hours. 63% of the people answered that. Honestly, that's because they don't feel so good about themselves watching so much TV. So the researcher went back and changed it to give more gradations in the number of hours, and they got much more sort of a depth of understanding by doing that. And you can see it all in here. So people are more truthful if the answer has more choices. And then here's the other thing they observed. The answer they were looking for, which was less than 2.5 hours, was way down here in the scale, way over to the right. And because it wasn't like the first choice in the scale, they were more willing to pick it. So where you put the answer you're sort of expecting in that scale, if you have a choice, put it a little further down, and you'll see people pick that more likely than if they just pick if it's just at the very beginning of the scale. Another weird psychology thing. All right, let's talk about demographic questions, which can be very sensitive. First of all, remember our ethics, right? We only need to ask these if they're important for our research, and try to avoid answering too many of them. You can actually put these in a separate survey if you want to collect them from the same group or the people you're asking questions of, but you don't want to try to ask these if you don't need them. If you do ask them, put the less sensitive ones first, like age, marital status, but don't put income level. They'll just abandon. Those are questions that you want to leave towards the end if you need to know that. If you do ask sensitive ones, make sure you let people know. Remember that they may be less willing to answer them truthfully, especially if they don't feel safe. So make sure that you tell people up front, it's not going to be used for anything bad if you're collecting that information. And then if it's very personal, keep them to the end. You may find that they just don't answer them, but at least you have an opportunity for them to do that. So this is kind of best practices for demographic questions. In some cases, and you see this in all surveys these days, allow for an opt-out. I do not wish to answer. If you do that, you're more likely to get the survey answered all the way than if you just insist on a choice. Example here is gender. Okay, moving on to length. How long should the survey be? So research has shown that you get most people for about 15 to 20 questions. And if you start going further, you're going to lose people. The drop-off rates gets more and more significant. You try to keep your survey to 10 minutes or less. 25-minute surveys have 3 times more dropout than 5 surveys. If you just want to know one thing, just ask that one thing. How likely are you to recommend us to a friend? You see this a lot on websites and stuff. It's a way for websites to collect over time, over large groups, over big demographics, answers to specific questions. And they may ask different people different questions, which gives them a bigger sample size and a bigger range and more depth in their answers to these kinds of questions. So consider small surveys, one question surveys. Those are okay. Remember that online surveys have a very wide audience. You may get lots of people responding to your single question survey, which will give you a big breadth of people and depth of knowledge. And you don't have to ask everyone the same question. You want to try to limit your answer times to less than 10 seconds for your simple question. So avoid the Kyoto Protocol. We have to go Google what that is. And take the survey yourself. That will help you time it. So as you develop your survey, it'll help you time it, and it also makes sure you eliminate redundant questions. So this is the same thing with if you give it a test to students, you want to take that test yourself or have someone take it for you, just to make sure that you've got it honed in to the kinds of information you're trying to collect. So it's okay to do it yourself and see how well it flows. Here's a fun one. There's different thinking around the use of graphics and icons in surveys, but they do add interest, and the data does show, research does show that they do add some fun, some access, some interest. More people will stay engaged, especially across different demographics. Like younger people will probably stay more engaged than elderly people or whatever. So you just have to think about who you're asking these questions to. You have to try to avoid really glitzy things. Those are distracting and they'll take away from the survey, but it's okay to code into, say, icons, the scales. And it makes people interested and it makes it more enjoyable. You do want people to stick with the survey to the end. So this is a tip for helping retain your audience. And then another really good thing to consider is routing your responses through. Remember, the best survey, research has shown that the best surveys are those that read kind of interesting to someone. So somebody who sits down to do a survey, they're doing it because it's interesting to them generally. Tailored paths will keep that interest. And if you have routing in your survey, that helps tailor it to specific groups. So what's routing? Routing is based on answer A, you're going to ask this set of questions. Or if they choose answer B, you take them down a different question path. And doing that keeps attention going with the respondents, and it makes it more interesting to them. And these completion rates are pretty significant. So routing is a good tip or a good trick to keep in your toolbox when building surveys. And then there's all kinds of surveys that are specific to problems you're trying to collect information about. So there are unique questions around cart abandonment that you can ask. Why did you abandon the cart? And there are lots of research projects and research papers on what are the right kinds of questions to ask when you get into cart abandonment to try to get a good understanding of why people abandon their cart. And it's a lot of strange reasons, and maybe that they don't like your user interface. So check out, if you want to do a survey that gets into that domain, check out templates and examples of how to ask questions for that domain. These are all target specific surveys that are out there with templates and examples and questions that you can look into, and they can help you design your questions to achieve the SMART goals. So you don't always have to start from scratch. You can start from good practices and best principles that people have done, be outside of your space or in your space for these kinds of places where they build surveys that you can use, that gives you a jump up on how to build effective surveys when you build them. And that leads me into using a platform. So a lot of the best practices are encapsulated in platforms, and a simple Google search returned these are like kind of the top survey tools, and most of them are free, and they let you set up effective surveys, and they come with best practices, templates for all kinds of domains that you can use to get started. I myself frequently use SurveyMonkey. It's just nice, it's anonymous, and I wouldn't necessarily use it for anything sensitive, but it's really great for just understanding some question that I want to do research on. And then there's others that are very good for researchers that you can look at that have targeted research questions and recommendations for them. So platforms are great. They let you do things like routing. They have icons that you can use. Definitely look at these before you sit down and just design a survey from scratch. This will get you jump started. All right, we're at the end of the journey. I do want to just remind you, we're just scratching the surface here. There are hundreds and hundreds of resources. There are courses in survey design, including a couple from SAS. I put the two SAS ones up here that are really good. A paper that we have a number of papers on this topic, but there's some good ones that are out here. And then we have a webinar on best practices for survey. We have analysis tools in our procedures that will analyze survey data, check for bias, help you understand how to statistically reweight, which we're going to talk about in a minute, so you get the right kind of distributions that you're looking for in your sample sizes to help you make the right decisions or draw the right conclusions from your survey. So some of that's in here, and then found a bunch of other papers that were very interesting in here. And I will give this PowerPoint to the mediators, and so you'll have access to all these resources. All right, I'm going to stop there and ask if anyone has any questions. No questions in the chat? Okay, I'll keep going, and then we have one more time at the end for questions. All right, we're going to talk about sampling, errors, and bias. So sample size. How do you decide the sample size of that's going to give you the best estimate of your true population? So there's a really nice little sample size calculator in SurveyMonkey, one of those template platforms that you have access to build surveys, and it's free, and you don't need to use their platform to develop it, but you can just go use that sample size calculator to help you understand it. It depends to some extent on if you need a statistically valid sample or if it's just sufficient to sample a series of people that are in the relevant groups that you want to consider. So when you're trying to figure out sample size, think about what is the size of your population and how accurate do you want to be. If you need a smaller error, then you need bigger samples. Fortunately, online surveys do have access to lots of different demographics, but definitely think about that. There are markets that need specific statistically significant samples. Education is generally one of those, healthcare, market research, but customer feedback, employee surveys, participant surveys, they probably don't need statistically significant samples. If you can get them, great, but it's not as critical. And just remember that if you want a smaller area, you got to reach more people, more participants. So how do we increase participation? How do you get more people? Why do people take surveys? Well, research shows that there's really three main reasons. We want to be helpful. We want to make our opinion known. We enjoy that topic. That's something we care about. We really care about having choices in ice cream when we go to the ice cream store. That's something we care about. And so we want to tell people about it. And we're happy to take surveys on that. And then there is a third way or reason. Sometimes it produces a benefit, and it can come in the form of an incentive. And incentives do work. Let's talk a bit about incentives. First of all, do you need one? It depends on the survey. It depends on what you're trying to do with your survey. In some cases, like in the case of customer feedback, it's probably, research has shown it actually can be harmful in many cases, and there's a paper on that. And you do need to remember that if there is an incentive, it can introduce bias. Those that are motivated by incentives are more likely to take your survey than those that are less motivated. And that is to some extent demographic driven. So what kinds of incentives can you give? Of course, there's monetary incentives and non-monetary incentives. Research has shown that monetary increases participation more than non-monetary. There are a couple ways you can do monetary. Probably the easiest way is to do a sweepstakes. By taking the survey, you will be entered in a drawing to win an iPad. That works more than the no incentive, but you'll get less participation than just, I'm going to give you a $5 Amazon gift card for taking my survey. So prepaid like that is the most effective, but it's also the most difficult. So you just have to think about how you want to do it if you want to do an incentive. Sweepstakes are pretty good, especially if you don't have a big budget. Find one thing, and people will be more motivated to complete your survey if they have even the hope of achieving something from it, if you're going to use an incentive. We've already talked about this. Keep the number of questions to a minimum with the goal of 10 minutes or less to complete the whole survey. Stick to closed-ended questions. If you do use the qualitative questions, put them at the end. Don't have more than one or two. Keep the answers balanced. Try to put a middle number or sort of a middle choice in there. An example is very helpful, helpful, neither helpful nor unhelpful. And then I don't have anything at the end. A balanced would be very helpful, helpful, neither helpful nor unhelpful, unhelpful, very unhelpful. A balanced gives more people incentives to choose something that's more likely what they're thinking. And research has shown that if you use absolute words like every or all or always, people will be less willing to answer A, truthfully, or B, find an answer they like. And so they'll abandon. So try to remove those kinds of absolutes. Keep the wording more nebulous and give more choices that are balanced or more numbers in your scale. Errors in survey design are measured to some extent in something called total survey error, which is basically all the errors that can accumulate as you're designing, administering, and leveraging the data in the survey. And that's all of the places that the survey comes from start to finish. And what total survey error does is it tells you basically how far are you away from the true answer if you could survey the whole population. So that's how I'm 5% away from what the whole population would answer correctly. And there are statistical ways to handle that. And our SAS procedures do that, do handle that for you or can help you do that. So here's what total survey error is. It's a example. So a population could be the residents of a country who are over 18, or they could be all the students at a university, or they could be all the customers who might ever buy this product. That's the population. So that's the true thing we're trying to estimate. And then we do our sampling, and the error is how far away we are from measuring that true population. So what introduces survey errors? These are there's kind of four main categories to think about. The first one is coverage, and these are examples. So here's my true population over here on the left-hand side. These are all the answers if I could survey everybody. These are what the true population would think of something. So I asked all these questions, but I didn't ask the right group. So you can see over here's the whole population and the both left and right. And if I use the smaller bounding box, I asked a lot of them, but I missed some of the red outliers or some of the yellow outliers in my true population. And so I missed some of the group. If I want to fix that, I need to increase my sample size. I need to include more of my target population in my survey size. So that's kind of coverage error. If you think you might have coverage error, or you want to get more of those outliers, easy answer, just increase the size of your survey, get a bigger sample size. Another one is sampling error. So my sample is not representative of my true population. So I did a statistical sample, but my true population included groups that weren't in my sample. So the simple answer to this one too, just increase your sample size. You can also weight, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, but there's no substitution for not understanding your true population. So if you didn't get the results you expect, or if you got results that you really think are questionable, you probably need to go back and do some research into what is in fact your true population. And there's a great example of this in a recent paper that I read in Harvard Business Review around a company that was they sold beauty products. And they did a study of their population who was buying their products because they wanted to give them an incentive to buy more products. And the incentive didn't work. They weren't getting anybody to buy more products. And so they went back and they studied, well, who are these people who are in fact buying our products? Who are our truly loyal customers? And the demographic was not at all what they thought. It was a much younger, much diverse, more urban population than they thought they were selling into. And the channels they were selling into were not as cost effective as they had. So they were putting more effort on box type stores and less on online. But in fact, their online sales were actually increasing. And so they changed the population that they sampled from and that they set the incentives to, and their sales jumped significantly. So understanding the population that you're asking the questions of will help hone in on a more accurate answer. Non-response error. This is when you do everything right, but you just don't get people to take the survey, or they abandon the survey before they're done. So you have to watch the results and make sure that you're meeting the threshold you expect. You can try offering incentives. You can do targeted recruitment. You can send out emails before, during, after, encouraging people to take your surveys and thanking them for that. Even just a simple thank you, letting them know in advance and a response afterwards will keep that person potentially loyal to the next survey. And of course, the best practice is keep the survey short and people will be less likely to abandon. And then we'll talk about weighting. So we'll talk about weighting in a minute. We'll go on to measurement error. So this is the final kind of reason we might have errors in our survey responses. The gaps are significantly different between what we intended to measure and what we actually got. And this is when you check your results against what your expectations are. And boy, that null hypothesis is the true case. That null hypothesis was not what I expected. So if you're getting an answer that you really didn't expect, or if you're getting an answer that looks really out of line with reality, think about that. Be a little bit, I guess, in your response analysis, be a little skeptical of the responses and ask those outside questions. Does this response make sense? Is this the kind of expectations I had? And if it isn't, you may need to go back and look at your survey. There are some tips to handle this case. Use closed-ended questions, consider adding more response scales, and then test that survey. Maybe the survey is just too vague that the respondents can't answer it right. And that will introduce bias, which you don't. You want more variance in your responses. So what gives you bias? And this is all kinds of really interesting research. Yes, no questions will lead to bias. And research is showing this, and this is back to, there's a whole psychology around asking the right kinds of questions. Less educated people or less informed people tend to have a greater tendency to agree to a yes/no question than those who are more familiar with the topic or have a higher level of education. Very interesting research. Very strange to see that. It's kind of an anti-pattern, but it's interesting that the research is showing that. So what's the answer? It's not to, try to include bigger people here. It's basically to avoid yes/no questions. You want to give them that scale. Provide alternatives. And there's some examples. This is from the Pew Research paper, showing how much bias can get introduced with these agree-disagree questions. Early questions in your survey can affect later responses. If someone remembers a very specific question and we do, for 20 questions, we still have short-term memory going on as we're reading the survey. That can affect the later responses. So I might ask a question about what do you do you believe that we should do voting on universal health care and in yes or no, or in a scale of 1 to 10? And then I get further down and I say, how do you think about the federal government funding universal health care? I've asked a very specific question and then a more general question, and I remember that. And so I'm probably less likely to answer the more general question in a less biased way, because I'm remembering my answer to the more specific question. So good rule of thumb, start generic and then move to the specific. Remember did you have questions about your child's food? Did your doctor answer those questions for you? Did the nurse answer those questions? So going down in depth and specificity can help avoid question order bias. All right, weighting. Weighting comes in when you want to make the sample look more like the real population. And generally we do weighting for demographics, but there can be other reasons for doing it as well. And this was some great examples. This is from SurveyMonkey. This was an example of a question about what social media platforms do you use? And so they asked this question, and this was before weighting what they got. So they got 79% using Facebook, 75% using TikTok. And then they went back and they looked at some demographics around, we know certain age populations are heavier users of TikTok and less users of Facebook than we expect. So let's go back and figure out if there's some demographic differences going on here. And so now they're starting to do a little more depth in their research. And so they did a demographic survey and they said, okay, who uses social media? And they came back with this information. In the survey, who responded, they had 65 and up, a much higher percentage response rate than in the actual US population. Same with the young people. They had a much lower response rate about social media use in a younger population than in the true United States population. So the yellow is the true US population. The green is how many said they used it. Big difference in the age ranges in the actual responses in here. So this example proves that we probably need to do better weighting. And so this is what it looks like when they went back to weighting. I still think these numbers might be biased, but this is where the numbers ended up once they added weighting into the mix. And you can see that Facebook went a little further over and TikTok went way over. But some of these other ones pretty much stayed the same. And this is an example of before and after of TikTok. So they had the unweighted response for TikTok. If you based your decisions on that, you'd be basing them on incorrect assumptions. And this is the after weighted. And you can see that it varies a lot in the after weighted by month or week or day. So weighting can be very valuable as a resource for garnering accurate answers in specific questions. So how do you weight? Generally, it's demographic driven. If you think that the demographics are going to be highly predictive of the kinds of answers you're asking, and even if you don't think, but if you're brainstorming together as a group to come up with questions and demographics has a correlation to what your question is, then you should think about weighting using demographics. So that's kind of the trigger point. If you think they may be predictive of the questions you're asking, then choose your population targets and you'll reweight your answers for those. And you can use a lot of open data for the population targets. For example, the recent US Census publishes all their data on the population percentage. It still has some inaccuracies under reporting of certain groups and over reporting of certain groups, but they provide weights in the US Census data. And it's free, it's out there, and it's really handy to use. From a healthcare data, the HRSA database from the US government provides all kinds of information about demographics for healthcare data. I myself have used it in healthcare analytics research. And it's really handy. It's a huge database of all kinds of information, including things like who's in the rural population and who's not, that kind of thing. So use these open source data systems to help you weight properly based on demographics. They're out there, they're available for researchers. And you can also use, by the way, the tools, SurveyMonkey and some of the others all have access to weighting options. And SAS also has access to weighting options that you can use to help you re-weight your responses appropriately for the population you're trying to target. You do need to trim. If you aren't using any of the tools like our products or SurveyMonkey's products, you need to consider trimming. You will get the top, very, very top and the very, very bottom. If there aren't enough respondents in those places, they'll get weighted too high. And so you'll need to make sure that you trim them to don't overemphasize those outlier parts. And there's some papers on how to do this in the resources. And just reminder that tools like SAS tools and SurveyMonkey tools, they will help you do this if you need help doing it. Few other tips for reducing bias. You can increase your distribution channels if you can, which will also improve non-response rates. So don't just think of one channel like email. If you have access to the college website, social media. Remember, people take surveys because they care about the topic and they want to do a good deed in a lot of cases, and they want to let their opinions be known. So you can put stuff out. Don't be shy about asking these kinds of questions because people feel good about answering them. So it's a positive win-win for everybody, the researcher and the people taking them. So use more channels to increase your distribution. Don't be afraid to do personal invites. You can do reminders. The survey's coming up. Just a reminder, we're going to do it in 3 days. You signed up to help us. Looking forward to doing it together. So those kinds of things can help increase the population contribution and the distribution side. This is another tip. Sometimes people zone out after like question 10. So you can mix in something fun and that might keep interest and also make sure that they're paying attention. What's the color of the moon? Blue, very blue, yellow. You can put something like that in there and it'll just ensure that people are not zoning out. This actually is used more frequently in longer surveys, but you can insert it in the middle of yours if you just want a little comic relief or to give people sort of a chance to reset their thinkings. They're not thinking about the questions you asked in the first 10 questions, they're thinking about the second 10 questions, something like that. An interlude just to make it interesting. You can consider that as a technique for reducing bias. And then the next one is used frequently in surveys, randomize the questions. So the first time you take a survey, question 5 might be question 2 and question 2 might be question 7. You can have a pool of questions, and out of this pool of 50 questions, you're going to ask 20 of the first person and 30 of 20 for the second person. So randomizing the questions can give you more depth and more breadth across your distribution and your respondents. And then don't always keep like either all positive or all negative questions. You can mix those in. And sometimes just changing the scale may get a different set of interests or a different set of responses, inverting the negative versus the positive. So the negative being 0 on this question and the most positive being 10. And the next time you'll see it inverted where 10 is the most negative and 0 is the most positive. Mixing that up will keep interest, and it will also force people to think, and it has proven in research to reduce bias. All right, I'm going to just point out a couple of classes that we support at SAS. We have a very good class on survey design based on probability principles using our SAS procedures that can help you with survey design. This is the schedule. It's in the PowerPoint that I'll be sharing. It's a very good class. And then we have a free webinar It talks about surveys and then using our survey procedures. It's an interesting webinar. I put that in here. And then we have a lot more classes that we offer through our company. We have classes on Coursera. We have our SAS training website. And just a reminder that we have a lot of SAS classes that talk about all kinds of aspects of analytics, surveys just being one topic in that area. So here's our agenda. We're wrapping up. These were the 3 areas we covered, and then we're going to move on to a Q&A. And we can either do it in verbal, or you can put them in the chat and we'll try to respond. Do we have any questions? I'll have one for you. Was this helpful? I'll ask another one. Was there one thing in the tips or tricks or techniques that you found resonated in your own experiences? I see someone saying, especially in sampling issues. Yes, the yes/no bias was interesting for me as well. There's several papers on that, and then there's a whole research area in the Pew Charitable Trust that talks about that yes/no bias for different demographics. It was very interesting to read that, how the scale really can help reduce bias in some of the answers. I know I've seen the scale. Sometimes I find it annoying, but yeah, I found it to be really interesting. Okay. This was a lecture I would give to grad. I was expecting to actually build an online survey in SAS. That's something we can do. If that's something that's of interest, we can have a second, or maybe we do a webinar on how to build an online survey. Definitely can do that. Lori could take that as a to-do.
Absolutely. Most of these seminars were just supposed to be an introduction to the topic to figure out where really there's interest in providing workshops. So that is super helpful feedback to hear.
Yep, and we could definitely do a workshop on that. That would be fun.
Are there any other questions?
Or comments?